immediately get this reference, but you were recently declared the ultimate mob wife for your outfit at the SNL after party. You're kind of rocking it right now with this, I will say, living up to the reputation.
In a world where love stories are dissected, speculated, and consumed by millions before they are even fully lived, Dakota Johnson has always been a woman who guarded her silence like a final act of rebellion. But that silence finally broke. It happened not in a tabloid leak or an anonymous source's whisper, but in the unlikeliest of settings. A polished, softly lit Vanity Fair interview meant to promote her latest film, After the Stillness, a deeply introspective project about a woman torn between love and duty. The journalist had eased into the conversation gently, asking about her creative process, about the way she embodied emotional restraint on screen. Then, almost casually, the question came, whether the story of a woman who loves a man too devoted to his cause to ever choose her reflected something from her personal life. Dakota, usually elegant in her deflection, did not smile this time. She did not play coy or offer a vague, poetic answer. Instead, she looked straight into the camera, her eyes holding that quiet, melancholic intelligence that so often hides truth in plain sight, and said in a low, trembling voice, "I think it's time for me to tell the truth." The room fell silent. The interviewer later described it as the kind of silence that feels like the air itself is listening. No one expected a confession, least of all, one that would confirm the most whispered secret of the past 2 years, that Dakota Johnson and Outlander star Sam Heughan had shared something more than friendship, something real, something that had begun in stolen moments and ended not with betrayal, but with silence. When Dakota finally said the words, it felt almost surreal, as if she were narrating a love story that had already turned into a legend. "I fell in love with Sam Heughan," she admitted, her voice steady, her expression heartbreakingly serene. "I loved him in a way I had never loved anyone else." It was not sensational, not bitter. It was, instead, the quiet courage of a woman telling the truth not for attention, but for closure. She described him with tenderness, as though she were remembering not the celebrity, not the Scottish actor adored by millions, but the man who once sat across from her in the dim light of her Los Angeles kitchen, reading poetry aloud between glasses of wine. "He made me feel safe in my own mystery," she continued softly. "With him, I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to perform. I could just be." They would spend evenings in quiet companionship, she said, reading, drinking, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. "We shared silence," she recalled, the corners of her mouth tightening into a bittersweet smile. "And it was the most intimate thing." For Dakota, whose life had been shaped by the weight of lineage, the daughter of Melanie Griffith, the granddaughter of Tippi Hedren, the product of Hollywood's golden shadows, this love had been an escape into authenticity. "He made me feel like I could disappear from all of that," she confessed. "Like I could just be a normal woman who believed in something irrational, something as old-fashioned as love." But the story, as she told it, was not one of fairy tales or happy endings. It was a slow unraveling, marked not by betrayal or anger, but by the quiet, devastating ache of unreciprocated depth. "He never did anything wrong," she said, her voice calm, her face composed. "He didn't lie. He didn't betray me. But he didn't choose me either. Not completely. And it's that indecision that feels like betrayal." Those words hung heavy in the air. It wasn't a cry for sympathy, nor was it an accusation. It was the plain truth of loving someone whose soul is too divided between worlds. The man and the myth, the heart and the career, the need for connection and the fear of being known. "Sam is an unpredictable person," Dakota continued, her gaze lowering as, though she were watching a film reel only she could see. "He lives with an incredible sense of responsibility, to his fans, to his work, to his country, to this image of strength that the world expects of him. And sometimes, I felt like I was just a stopover, like he wanted to love me, but he didn't know how to fit me into the life that everyone else had already written for him." Then came the story of the moment it all fell apart. Not in an argument, not in anger, but in absence. He had promised to come to Italy in July, Dakota said, to spend time together between their projects. "I waited," she said, her voice barely audible. "I prepared everything, and he didn't come." There was no text, no explanation, just a silence that said everything words couldn't. I saw a picture of him with his film crew in Iceland, she continued, her eyes glistening under the studio lights. And I knew I wasn't his priority. And what hurt the most wasn't that he didn't come, but that he never told me why. I had to guess my worth. I had to love for both of us. Her composure remained unbroken. There were no tears, no dramatics, but that restraint, that quiet strength, felt heavier than any public heartbreak. She didn't need to cry. The stillness in her voice did all the crying for her. The journalist later said it was the first time he'd seen a confession that felt more like a eulogy, not for a person, but for the dream of what could have been. Those who had followed the rumors, the whispered sightings, the interviews where their eyes seemed to find each other's names before their lips did, finally had their answer. The chemistry that fans had sensed was real. The reason it vanished was simpler and sadder than scandal. It wasn't betrayal. It was timing. We lived in two different worlds, Dakota admitted. I lived in quiet spaces. He lived in a world of noise and light and expectations. And somewhere between those worlds, we lost the space where we could meet. She spoke with the self-awareness of someone who had long made peace with her pain, but still felt its echo. Sometimes love isn't a grand failure, she added. It's just a quiet mismatch between two souls who can't synchronize their rhythms. She admitted that in the early months, it had been effortless. Dinners in small London restaurants where no one recognized them, long drives through the Scottish countryside, whispered promises made under stars. Sam had written her letters long and old-fashioned, the kind of thing that made her believe he loved her in a timeless way. He made me laugh in ways I didn't know I could, she said softly. He could make the simplest things, a walk, a meal, a cup of tea feel cinematic. Yet even then, she sensed the fragility of it. He was always half somewhere else, she said. Even when he was next to me, there was a part of him that was already gone, already thinking about the next scene, the next commitment, the next country. And I loved him knowing that. Maybe that was my mistake. She paused for a long moment before continuing. Love doesn't fail because people are bad. It fails because people can't meet each other where they are. He needed to be everything to everyone, and I just wanted him to be mine for a while. After their quiet ending, Dakota withdrew even further into privacy. Friends said she spent months in reflection, writing, reading, and trying to translate the experience into art. After the stillness was born, in part from that emotional landscape, a meditation on loving someone who belongs too much to the world to belong to one person. That's why this film means so much to me, she admitted during the interview. It's about understanding that sometimes love isn't supposed to be forever. Sometimes it's just supposed to teach you who you are. In that line, there was no bitterness, only gratitude, the kind of gratitude that comes from surviving something beautiful that ended too soon. When asked if she and Sam still spoke, Dakota gave a faint, knowing smile. "We don't," she said, "but I hope he's happy, truly." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "He once told me that silence between two people can mean different things, comfort or distance. I think ours became the second kind. It was the most devastatingly gentle way to describe the death of intimacy, a love that went from private solace to unbridgeable quiet." In the days following the interview, the internet lit up with clips and quotes from her confession. Some called it heartbreaking, others called it brave. But those who listened carefully heard something deeper, a woman who had loved without armor, who had finally allowed the world to see the cost of that vulnerability. She hadn't exposed Sam to hurt him, nor romanticized their story to win sympathy. She had simply told the truth as it lived inside her. Tender, complex, and unfinished. "I think love should be honest," Dakota concluded at the end of the interview, her eyes lowering. "Even if the honesty breaks your heart." When the camera stopped rolling, she sat in silence for a while, sipping her water, gathering herself. The crew later said that no one dared speak for several minutes. It was as if everyone in that room had just witnessed something sacred. Not a scandal, not gossip, but the rare courage of a woman choosing truth over protection. For Dakota Johnson, that confession was not a revelation for the public. It was an act of release, a way to finally close a chapter that had lingered in half-light between rumor and reality. And perhaps in that vulnerability, she became more powerful than she had ever been before. Not as an actress, not as a celebrity, but as a human being who dared to tell the world that even the most beautiful love stories can end quietly, without villains or closure, only with the aching grace of two souls who met, changed.
Like already made for tonight, I'll take it.
I will. I'll go get you some stuff. I actually made some chicken legs. Do you like chicken?
Chicken legs?
Yeah.
She was hurt to the point of no return. The kind of quiet, invisible pain that doesn't explode but instead seeps slowly through the soul, changing the way a person breathes, thinks, and trusts. There are certain moments in life when a question becomes the mirror of truth, and Dakota Johnson's question to Sam Heughan had been exactly that. If everything was gone, the fame, the job, the limelight, would you still choose me? She had asked it in a whisper one night when silence sat between them heavier than words, and his answer had been nothing more than a soft smile and a kiss that tasted like avoidance. It was the kind of silence that tells you everything you need to know, and Dakota, in her calm, self-deprecating laugh during the interview, admitted that when someone can't answer the most important question, that is already an answer. Her words resonated deeply because they came from a place of acceptance, not bitterness. From a woman who had carried her love quietly and was finally letting it go, not with anger, but with grace. After her confession, people went back to watch old interviews of Sam. The subtle glances away, the half-smiles, the perfectly polite evasions when love was mentioned. They began piecing together moments like detectives of emotion, realizing that perhaps Sam had been in love, but with timing, with ambition, with his own path, not with the woman who had stood beside him in the quiet. One journalist posted on X, formerly Twitter, "Sam isn't a bad man. He's just too good at playing the good man, even in real life." And that observation struck a chord, because that's the truth of many gentle heartbreaks. They don't happen because someone is cruel, but because someone is too kind to be honest, too afraid to confront what love demands of them. Dakota's story wasn't about betrayal, but about absence. The emotional absence that lingers even when someone's body is right beside you. The final act of her love story came in the form of a handwritten letter. A gesture so intimate, so tender, that it almost belonged to another century. She sent it to Sam's hotel in Iceland while he was filming, unsure if he would ever read it. "Sam," she began, "I'm not writing to make you choose. I'm writing to say that I chose you over and over again, even when you didn't choose me." Her words were steady, unaccusing, and filled with quiet dignity. "But love, if it's only one-sided, will eventually become a burden," she wrote. "And I don't want to be a burden in your life." The final line of the letter, written in delicate black ink, read like a prayer to the universe itself. "If there is another life, I hope to meet you in a place without a stage, without an audience. Just two people learning to love without fear of losing each other." It wasn't a goodbye laced with resentment. It was a benediction, a release. She let him go not because she stopped loving him, but because she finally understood that holding on would mean holding herself back. That letter, according to a close friend, was never returned. No reply came, no message, no phone call. Just the silence that Dakota had already learned to live with. But there was something liberating in that too. The acceptance that closure sometimes arrives in the form of nothing at all. When Dakota was later asked in her Vanity Fair interview why she chose that moment to reveal the truth, her answer was neither defensive nor dramatic. "Because I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not afraid of people knowing that I loved someone who couldn't love me back. I'm not afraid of being judged as weak because I've lived my life." Then she paused and spoke a sentence that quieted the entire room. A sentence that would soon travel across social media like a ripple through still water. "I'm not sharing to hurt anyone. I'm sharing so that anyone who has ever loved in silence, chosen the wrong person, or hoped at the wrong time knows that they are not alone." That single statement became one of the most shared quotes of the year. Thousands of people reposted it with the hashtag used to love like Dakota. A digital chorus of empathy for those who had loved bravely and lost silently. Women from all over the world commented beneath her words, confessing their own quiet heartbreaks. their own stories of loving someone who couldn't quite meet them halfway. It became not just Dakota's confession, but a collective awakening. A reminder that love, no matter how it ends, still has dignity when it is honest. In the weeks that followed, all eyes turned to Sam Heughan. Would he respond? Would there be an explanation, a denial, an apology? But none came. Sam disappeared from social media for 3 long weeks. No posts, no red carpets, no public sightings. Silence, the same silence that had defined their ending. Then, when he finally appeared on a talk show in Scotland to promote his new film, the host, ever so delicately, decided to touch the subject without naming it. Someone once said, the host began, that sometimes we lose the most beautiful things because we are too busy holding on to things we don't really need. What do you think about that? Sam smiled faintly, the kind of smile that barely hides pain. There was a flicker in his eyes, something weary, perhaps regretful, perhaps just resigned. I think, he said softly, there are people you will never forget, even if they are no longer around. That was it. No names, no denial, no apology. Just a truth suspended between confession and restraint. For many, that sentence said everything. He had loved her, maybe still did, but love, for him, was something he compartmentalized, something that couldn't compete with his public life. Dakota had been the quiet heart he couldn't fully choose, the stillness that didn't fit his storm, behind the glamour of their separate worlds. Her in the poetic melancholy of indie cinema, him in the disciplined heroism of epic drama. There had been a private, deeply human story about 2 people who met at the wrong time in their lives. She, a woman of introspection and emotional clarity, searching for realness in a world of illusion. He, a man whose identity was split between who he was and who the world wanted him to be. Their love was never destined to last because it belonged to a moment rather than a lifetime. A beautiful, fragile intersection of 2 souls who recognized each other but couldn't remain together. The tragedy wasn't that it ended, but that it had been real. In a way, that's what makes it unforgettable. Because some loves, no matter how brief, illuminate the parts of us we never knew existed. And when they fade, we don't return to who we were before. We become quieter, wiser, more human. Dakota, after the interview, didn't seek sympathy or validation. She returned to work, to her art, to her life. But those who knew her said something in her had changed, not broken, but deepened. There was a new